kind of introduce yourself and tell us about what your campaign's about. What do you hope to do as a councilwoman?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for inviting me to speak today too. I'm Valerie Carroll. I am running for First Ward Council Rep, and I'm currently unopposed. Um, my background is on the Planning and Zoning Commission, and I've been working on a lot of things that relate to affordable housing, at least tangentially, and housing supply, housing diversity, housing availability. I really do see this as something that the First Ward is intimately connected to. It affects us dramatically, and is always in the conversation whenever we have a get together with neighbors, with interest groups. Every neighborhood get together is talking about the latest rises in housing costs. We are in a housing crisis, and neighbors have seen the housing costs rise over time, both rent costs and housing for sale. They've also seen a short supply, and especially short supply right now, of houses on the market and rentals that are available. And that is in all price points. Everyone is feeling pressure from this. I do think that the more affordable houses, they feel the pressure the most because those go especially quickly. People who want to live in the First Ward, people who want to stay in the First Ward are struggling to find homes either for sale or rent. And we end up displacing a lot of our population because of that. A lot of people have had to leave the First Ward to move to other wards for housing related issues. And that's constantly on people's minds. I know at the last update that I heard from Randy Cole, there were over 1,000 households on the waiting list for public housing and voucher programs. We really do need to add some density to meet this demand. There's some things that are already in the process. So during my time on planning and zoning, one of the big things that we worked on was substandard lot activation. So of course, just intrinsically looking around, you probably realize First Ward is generally older neighborhoods that are relatively built out and built on smaller lots. Most of the First Ward was built under the 1927 zoning code, which generally has smaller footprint housing, smaller setbacks, things like that. The impact of that is that when there is an empty house, empty lot, either because a house was demolished for some reason, or because it was not built out, the empty lots tend to be smaller lots, or what we would call substandard lots. That means they don't meet the dimensional standards of our current zoning code, which was passed in the 2000s. Current zoning code says that you have to have 60 feet lot width. Well, most of First Ward has narrow, long lots. And so when there's a missing empty lot in the First Ward, it takes a long time to get those built out. And the incentive there is for people looking to develop their empty lot to wait to buy the neighboring lot, consolidate lots, and then in order to defray the cost of having to consolidate lots and wait to build, sit on an empty lot, they have to build something larger. They have to build an apartment building with more units to help with that cost. This doesn't really serve anyone, because if we have empty lots sitting, waiting to be developed for sometimes decades, that is not positively affecting our housing supply. And simultaneously, the larger buildings and lot consolidations are generally something that are unpopular with the neighborhoods, and are something that often ends up being resisted. What we worked on was to amend our ordinances to activate the substandard lots. And basically what we did there was to allow substandard lots, if you can demonstrate that you were on a lot that was already substandard, already empty, and underneath the 69 width or not meeting any one of the dimensional standards, you could now build it under substandard lot standards, which are similar to our cottage standards. But the benefit of this is that it wouldn't take a second rezoning action. And this is generally welcomed by the neighborhood because all of the existing homes here are small footprint. The majority of them are small footprint, 1 to 2 bedroom, 1 bath cottages. And I think something that I want to stress here is that the first ward has a pretty large supply of our affordable housing already. Even the in situ affordable housing, some of these older 1-bedroom cottages are the ones that could be used with voucher programs. They are the ones that rent at lower rates. And so we're really trying to encourage small lot development in the first ward and throughout the city. We've already had cottage standards approved. The problem with the cottage standards right now is that they can only be built under R2 zoning, even though they are a one single family home. These are the smaller developments help us to incrementally add density. They help us to address some of our housing shortages. But in order to use the cottage standards, very often people have to rezone to develop under cottage standards. And after rezoning, they still have to go to Board of Adjustments to get the approval to use the standards. So what we've worked on with planning and zoning is to make that a single zoning action. So instead of having separate cottage standards under a different zoning class, so you have a rezone and an approval, we now have essentially cottage standards, what's called small lot standards, so that you could do that in a single rezoning action and not have to go to 2 different boards for the single request. And planning and zoning is currently working on that ordinance. We expect it to go to council in the near future. The other thing that they worked on was reforming our ADU ordinance. An ADU is kind of like a what people call a mother-in-law suite, or like a smaller house or unit. It doesn't even have to be a separate building. If you have a basement suite or a living area above your garage, that is an ADU. And there's a lot of pre-existing ones that aren't licensed as rentals in the first ward. We did add ADU ordinance as a part of our code. I think that was about 6 years ago. And in the time after that was passed, we've had exactly 3 applications. So not many. So we looked at the reasons why that wasn't well used, because there is a lot of interest in all of the wards to build ADUs. And some of those reasons were because we have some restrictive conditions that didn't really make a whole lot of sense, like which way your front door faces, can it be attached to your house, things like that. Which way your front door faces is something that we expected to reduce the impact because initially people cared a lot about which way your front door faced, because people wanted it to look like, I guess, the neighboring single family homes. But the reality is, a lot of the neighboring single family homes have two doors. They have a front door and a breezeway. They have a front door and a garage door. And a lot of the people wanting to license their ADUs so they could get a rental certificate have a living space above the garage. So that has a second door. And that garage was previously there while it was a single living unit as well. So they're not even changing the look of their home. And I think it was well supported that people wanted to be able to use those as ADUs. So these are all small steps to add density. I also really want to talk about sensitive density additions. So the first ward is very sensitive to housing needs. We watch it play out in front of us every day. The first ward is already mostly zoned R2 and RMF. And there were blanket rezonings that caused a lot of pain to some of the residents, caused a lot of displacement. First ward has the lowest amount of R1 zoning of any other ward. So in the first ward, based on our 2022 survey of housing, first ward has 180 acres of R1 zoning, whereas wards 3 through 6 have something around 2,000 to 4,000 acres of R1 zoning. So we really are mostly fairly dense. We do have a lot of single family homes built on R2 zoning. And it has to be understood that single family homes can be built in any residential zoning. It doesn't have to be zoned for single family. But it is possible to build a duplex or a cottage development on R2, whereas it is not on R1. And we do have a lot of duplexes. We do have a lot of RMF, multifamily, small apartments. Most of the people who live in the first ward like living in a more urban area. A lot of people chose the first ward for walkability, chose the first ward for proximity to their workplaces. One of the things that makes the first ward more affordable is the walkability, because for people with lower incomes, the cost of transportation is very high. And living close to your workplace helps you get around. So we talked a little bit about dimensional standards for 1 and 2 bedroom baths and homes. I think it's important to point out that our cottage standards, when we look at the dimensional standards that we're encouraging for the purpose of adding density, they are very similar to our small lots that already exist in the first ward. And I think it's important to preserve the existing affordable housing that people have and can buy, because we really do have a huge inventory, especially in the west portions of the first ward, of small houses. And clearly those are getting less affordable. One of the things that I think frustrates a lot of first ward residents is that we've seen a lot of projects that were intended to add density in the name of affordability. And the result of those projects were to tear down 2 or more homes that were rented inexpensively and replace them with townhomes that are more expensive to rent. And it adds density, but it also displaced the renters of the smaller homes and they can't obtain the housing in the ones that replaced. Ultimately, that's a mechanism of displacement, and it's not in the immediate future going to ideally help with our affordability crisis. And so if we want to address adding density in a way that preserves affordability, I think we need to actually incentivize affordable housing. And that means allowing for fee waivers, for density bonuses, for I guess reduced expedited review of applications that have a certain percentage of homes that are reserved for below area median income, because we need to meet our supply of housing that can be afforded on 30% of a person's income. That's the basis of affordability.
David Mallory, I think, has a question. Dave?
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks. Yes, you used the word the term cottage quite a bit. I may have missed. Is that a specific definition as opposed to other single family homes?
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny because it is a specific definition in our zoning code. We have a cottage dimensional standards. And the benefit of the cottage dimensional standards is that you can build a single family home on a 30-foot wide lot, as opposed to on a 60-foot wide lot, as small as a 30. The reality is most of them don't go down to 30 because there are not a lot of lots that are that small. And people want a little bit more home on that. There are still setbacks and protections on our cottage standards. So, you know, it's not, it's a incremental step in density is what I would say. The new code that they're working on was originally called cottage. We decided to stop calling it cottage and call it small lot development, because honestly, there was confusion as to what cottage meant, because people think it means a type of housing or a look of housing, not a dimension that you can use.
Herb, you have a question.
Yeah.
Oh, it's Sue. Okay, two things. And actually it's not, I went by and didn't realize that St. Frank, well, first let me say the other thing. I've said in front of city council, and you might have been at that meeting, that one of the things that bothered me when we're having a lot of discussion about homeless, and that probably affects Ward 1 more than anyone, because there's more people that live in that area, live homelessly in that area. I want you to remember that the homeless are the males. They have more different safety nets than the women that are also homeless, because it's very dangerous for them to be on the street, and the women and children that absolutely try not to be. So they are couch surfing, is often the term used. And that problem is much bigger than what we see visibly with men. And now we have the veterans and all that. So I hope you will keep that in mind, not to just focus, because so much of the in front of city council has been homeless, and what gets the
Broadway. Yeah, that's Broadway.
that bothered me.
This is
The other thing though, do you know what happened to St. Francis House? Did they move? And the women's version of that's in Ward 1, isn't it?
It is in my ward.
I went by and saw the building was for sale.
Yeah, they changed their operations. I had heard that they changed their operations to not have people staying, or fewer rooms staying in their actual building. I remember receiving a report on that. I'll have to dig it up again. I think that they had said that their rooms were getting used less in recent days, which actually surprised me quite a bit, because our other services are saying that they're being used more. I'll have to dig up that report again. But yes, they did close and sell that house.
And the women's house seems to have been torn down. That was connected with St. Francis.
Yeah, I think that occurred quite some time ago.
Okay.
You know, I want to share, I feel really connected to the issue that you're talking about, to the needs of women who are homeless and their families. I have a family member who has frequently been homeless and is couch surfing right now. I have taken care of family members who have been homeless, and their kids. It's pretty personal to my family. And I think I see it in a way that maybe not many people get to see it.
Dave Taylor has a question on the chat. He says the term grandfathering occurs to me. Why not apply it to lot sizes?
So we have something along those lines, in addition. So if you have a lot and the building on it is destroyed by fire or torn down, and you can demonstrate the footprint of that building and build on the exact same footprint, you just get to do it. No zoning action, nothing. That's already in our code. The problem with that was that a lot of lots have been sitting empty for decades and nobody can demonstrate the footprint. And I think that legal had told us that if we had a code that was binding to some people and not all people, we couldn't apply some sort of pre-existing condition that you might call grandfathering. And so I guess that's how we ended up at, you can use our cottage standards instead. One of the things that I like about our cottage standards that I think makes this even a little bit better, we are moving away from solely setbacks. You have to build this box exactly at where we say, how we say, and we're moving towards area lot coverage. So, you know, people care about green space. But if we're too restrictive, it limits people's ability to be creative with oddly shaped lots. And a lot of the small lots that weren't built on are oddly shaped, and that's why they weren't built on. So I like that it opens up the ability to preserve green space by saying, you know, you can build on this percentage of your lot, as opposed to you must build the exact footprint of a previous building.
Valerie, it'll be good to have a housing expert on the council. I think it's probably been a long time since the council has had someone like that. Besides housing, what are some of your other priorities?
Yeah, my next priority, and I guess it ties in pretty directly with housing, but renters' rights. So we have in Columbia over 50% of our population are renters. In the first ward, it's more like 70%. And that's based on 2022 census data. And so the vast amount of my constituents are renters, and yet we're always talking about homeowners. One of the things that you see a lot in the first ward is rental units that are starting to show a lot of wear, that are falling apart, broken windows, I don't know, crumbling, crumbling sidewalls and porches and steps. We hear a lot about broken appliances. And it frustrates me because we have existing building codes that need to be enforced, but we only enforce on a complaint basis. And a lot of low-income renters are afraid to complain because they're afraid of retaliation. So, there's two things that I'd like to do there. I'd like to make sure that our building codes are enforced, not only on complaint basis, and I'd like to make sure that neighborhood services has enough staff to do that. Back in the day, maybe 5-10 years ago, they used to have walkthroughs with a member of neighborhood services and actually one of the police chiefs. And they would look around and, see which ones were obviously falling apart, obviously in non-compliance with our building codes, and contact the landlords and let them know, in the same way that you get the notice if you're non-compliant now. I think people think of tall grass and messy lawns, and those do get enforced, but those probably aren't the things that we need to be enforced the most. We need to enforce those. It's just fair. It's fair to the renters. The other thing is, I'd really like for us to have some protections for the renters who do make a complaint. It is true that if you make a complaint, the landlord will have to fix it, and you'll probably be eventually successful in getting your issue prepared. But the most common outcome is that they get evicted from their apartment. And that just can't be allowed. What I'd like to do is, if there is a recent property maintenance complaint, to have a period of 90 days or so where a landlord who has a complaint can't evict anyone. And hopefully that gives people a little bit more power, a little bit more comfort to speak up when they have an issue. I also think of infrastructure in the first ward. We have older, crumbling infrastructure. We have streets that are patched and patched again and patched over the patch and have enormous potholes. We have missing sidewalks. We always talk about how walkable downtown Columbia is, and that's a huge draw for our city. But 2 blocks outside of downtown Columbia, the sidewalk infrastructure is missing. And that's not a small thing, because so many of our residents need to be able to walk to work. So many of our residents are disabled and are using their wheelchairs in the street. I see this every single day. And even just like outside of my house on Ash, there was a pedestrian accident between a wheelchair user and a car. So I'd like to be able to advocate for sidewalk projects, for stormwater improvements, for roads in the CIP.
Yeah, Pam, question? Pam?
I got a phone call. My question is back to housing. I'd like to know more about Kenny Point that was started groundbreaking yesterday, I think.
Yeah, they just had their groundbreaking event yesterday, 3:30. Yeah, it's a brand new CHA housing structure. Randy Cole really did reach out to the neighbor a lot on this.
Good.
I love this project. I think in general, we love this project. Yeah, it's sensitive to the needs of the community. It adds a little bit less housing than I think everybody was hoping, but it adds a significant amount of housing given how many people we have waiting for housing. He was very thoughtful in designing it to match nearby homes. And that really eased the concerns of the neighborhoods. He looked at the nearby homes and mimicked their architecture. He has buildings, single buildings with 6 units in them that mimic the architecture with the pitched roof, with the craftsman style facade. And I think a big thing that I appreciate about this project, I think it was done as a PUD, a planned development. He was able to limit the parking and he took the time to ask for a parking waive. I appreciate parking waivers because it's true that the people he serves are less likely to own a vehicle. He doesn't need as much parking as everybody else, and no one wants to live next to a parking lot. I wish that more people building in walkable areas asked for parking waives. People are afraid that it's going to be unpopular, get turned down, and be an expensive process to go before planning and zoning. But if your neighbors are going to show up and support your request for a parking waive, planning and zoning is not going to say no. If your neighbors say you're bringing 1 million cars to the area and we don't like it, it might fail. But that goes back to developers who reach out to their neighbors, who have the conversations and build the relationships. They tend to be more successful. And I think we should encourage that kind of behavior. I see more hands.
Yeah, Sue or Herb?
Just a quick comment. Go ahead, Herb. You gotta get it unmuted.
It's unmuted.
No, it isn't.
Yeah, it is.
Okay. And on that, I also like about that Kenny Point is it has the community center. I think that gives that a charm that some of the public housings don't have. Okay, it's Herb.
Where is that? Where is Kenny Point?
It is on Sexton. I forget the cross street.
It's West Boulevard, north of Oak Towers, and between Oak Towers and Ridgeway School.
It's
The south side and to the west, to the east. And
It's
West
across
Boulevard to
from
the
Oak
west.
Towers, but it's not West Boulevard. I live on West Boulevard. It's north of me.
Garth.
Yeah.
Sorry. Okay. There you are, Herb.
Alice?
Herb was gonna do that.
Oh, go ahead. Sure.
Thank you very much, Valerie, for lucid discussion of issues of real property, housing, architecture, an area in which you are uniquely qualified. I invite you to identify briefly for us some other areas of policy which are also central to your campaign.
Sure. I think a lot about our neighborhood outreach program, about how we include people and reach out to people in discussions. We do tend to see the same people at public hearings for any issue all the time. I'd like us to be more proactive about who we reach out to expand our interested parties list, to send our postcards to more people. One of the things that I dislike about the new Be Heard Columbia, which I like that we have one place where people can find. I think we rely on it too much. I think it limits who can be engaged because not everyone has a computer. And I think it further limits who can be engaged because you have to sign up, make a registration and a password, and it takes several steps. And A lot of people get lost in the process. A lot of people don't feel comfortable giving out their personal information. Another thing that I consider a lot, we in Columbia just passed the sanctuary city ordinance. The idea behind that ordinance was to protect trans youth who were targeted by some of the state bills. That's something that I strongly support. I wish we could provide some more protections than just we will de-emphasize enforcement. But there are more things in our code that bother me related to the needs of LGBTQ families. One of which might be unpopular, but we have a definition of family as it relates to occupancy. And that could be viewed as exclusionary to non-traditional families. It's actually quite complicated, and there's a whole page with tables to determine whether or not your family meets the definition to be allowed a certain level of occupancy. I think that we would be much better served by just saying this number of people can occupy this type of dwelling, because I think it will ultimately get us to the same place without excluding people who, by our present understanding of family, are families. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that in principle, but wouldn't we have cases where we might exclude large families, with families with 6 or 7 kids from living in certain parts of the ward or Columbia?
One of the things we can do instead of doing a flat number is to rely on the International Property Maintenance Code, which defines occupancy based on the building and not by the number of people. So it has square footage requirements per person, for example. And I don't think that it's going, like when I compare that code to the houses that we have, I don't think that it's going to be highly limiting to larger families. Yeah, it is complex.
Yeah. Alice?
Okay, I'm really excited about you being on the council, Valerie. I've seen you in planning and zoning. You have a lot of knowledge on this. It's very exciting. But I wanted to ask about sidewalks. I've had more than one fall in the downtown area for, parades and when True Falls used to be there. I believe they did clean up the sidewalk on the edge of the Missouri Theater. I think they have improved that. So my question is, what is the responsibility of the occupant, the business, and the city? Does the occupant have any responsibility? I don't remember that
Yeah.
stuff.
Oh my goodness.
Because I
this
know
is
that
one of my-
sidewalks are expensive.
Yeah, this is one of my favorite topics, actually. And I only briefly touched on it when I was talking about infrastructure. Yeah, so right now, in most business and residential areas, it is the responsibility of the resident or the building owner to repair sidewalks. So if your sidewalk is damaged, if it's cracked, if it's crumbling, and you're the owner of that property, according to our codes, it's your responsibility to replace it. Downtown they're zoned differently. The downtown CID helps with maintenance of sidewalks, I believe. And the city may have a role in that too. Outside of MDT, it's the responsibility of business owners. I don't know if that's the only way we should do this. I know that recently Kansas City voted to approve a large sidewalk repair program that repaired a lot of their crumbling sidewalks at no cost to the property owners. And we do occasionally have spot sidewalk repairs. I think we have the same problem where we have a place to report crumbling sidewalks. And so the ones that get complained about are the most likely to get on that list. I will also say that it takes a very long time to move on that list. So we have a sidewalk master plan. It gets reviewed every 10 years. So its last review was 2022. It started in it didn't start, but the most recent revision was 2012, and it was revised again in 2022. And in those 10 years, 10 new sidewalks were built off the master sidewalk plan. And not all of them were ones that were priority. So they give a priority to sidewalks based on what it's near to. Is it near a public amenity like the health department, like the ARC, like school, like jobs, like a bus line? Is it near a lot of housing? Those types of things move you up in the priority list. The things that got built were sometimes priority one and sometimes not, and there were only 10 in 10 years. And none of these were extremely expensive projects compared to some of our larger public works projects, like, I don't know, expanding Forum. I would like to see us pay more attention to the sidewalk master plan, because I don't think we realize how many people it serves. And I think that our sidewalk use counts kind of lie in that if the sidewalks are crumbling, people don't use those sidewalks, they take another route. If the sidewalks aren't there, people don't walk on that road, they take another route. So your count doesn't actually work that way. And in addition to that, you know, we could build, I believe it was for nearly the same cost, all of the priority one sidewalks for about the same amount of money that one of our road widening plans, like the Forum widening costs. And I don't think that our road widening plans, where they're needed, I don't think they're a bad thing. I just think it's a matter of priorities. And in 10 years, surely we can build our priority one sidewalks out if we can do the larger projects as well.
Okay, thank you, Valerie, and we look forward to your service on the council. And we have a second speaker today. Welcome, Matthew, and Kathy, do you want to introduce him?
Yes. Our second speaker, who will address the Proposition 1 on the August 6th ballot, which is the Capital Improvements Sales Tax Extension. Our second speaker is Matthew Lue. He is and has been the finance director for the City of Columbia since 2019. He is the city's chief financial officer and financial policy advisor to the city manager. Mr. Lue oversees the city's financial planning, budgeting, purchases, accounting, pensions, and other financial administrative functions. Thank you for zooming in with us today, Mr. Lue.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here. I do have a short presentation for you all. Loaded up here. Okay, so can everybody see?
Yes, sir. That looks fine.
Okay. So Prop 1 is a initiative that will be voted on August 6th. And so the city currently has a 4-cent sales tax in place for capital improvement projects. Like I said, that'll sunset in December of 25. And so this tax is renewed by vote every 10 years or so. And it's proposed the next ballot renewal will be on August 6th. Sales tax for this will be divided between public works and police and fire, which is 75% public works, 25 police and fire or public safety. So here's a breakdown of previous ballot estimates and funding percentages. So for the proposed ballot this year, we're looking at another 75-25 split between public works and public safety. But we have seen a slight increase in what those taxes bring in as inflation has increased and the CPI increases each year, or the consumer price index. This is a map of the current improvement projects. And so all of the projects that were listed on the ballot for 2016 through 2025 are either completed, in construction, or currently in design. So how projects get on the list? First, safety is our number one concern as we look at highway safety ratings, collisions, and growth within our community. And so we also take into account the non-motorized components of the Climate Action Plan, or the CAP. We incorporate the Long Range Transportation Plan through the Columbia Area Transportation Study, or CATSO. And then we consult with the city council on specifics of the process and their priorities. So the projected projects are broken down like this. For the public works portion, 64% will go towards streets, 8% for facilities, and 3% for maintenance. 13% of the total will go toward police and 12% for fire. So here's a list of the projects on the new list, with the Sinclair to Niphone project being the most expensive at $12 million. If anybody has any questions, you can jump in at any time. And I can give you all a copy of this presentation too when we're done.
Well, when we just had some comments about how much is spent on sidewalks, the way you have it broken down, it doesn't give any seeming indication what part is sidewalks. And if you're talking about safety, certainly, I mean, I use Ash Street a lot and other places too, that we've got motorized wheelchairs going down the street, and that's scary for everybody, especially if it's not a wide street. You have to. It's just as bad, if not, it's actually more scary for the folks and for the motorists than bicycles on the street.
Mm-hmm. And so, in most cases, when we do widenings or some of these improvements, the sidewalks are included in those improvements. Not all, but most of the time.
But many of the sidewalks are not connected with road improvements. I think that's the basic point. And you may need, I think, Valerie, what you were saying is, I think you had a very good point, Valerie, that we need to be looking at having a separate, will be much smaller, but separate thing to address a lot of what are especially inner city, when we're getting all these things spent on the outskirts to have sidewalks, but not on the inner city.
So some of that are some of those are funding type of issues. Um, the city only has so much funding to go around for so many projects. We put a lot into getting input on projects and things like that. So if and this is something we'll talk about on Monday as we go through the budget, that we're coming to a point where if we don't have when we get these new initiatives, when we get these new opportunities for funding, we need to find some sort of revenue to match with those fundings. We have grown a lot. Our priorities have grown. Things that we want to do within our budget have grown, but the revenue has not keeping pace with that growth. And so that's a real concern of mine. As we start to look at different things and different initiatives. So now we'll highlight a few projects that were on that list. The first being Clark Lane improvements, estimated about 7.3 million. And so what it'll do is widen the road. It'll add sidewalks, stormwater improvements, and then an asphalt overlay as well. Second, we have the Fairview Road to Worley Street intersection. And so this will replace a two-way stop with the roundabout and a realignment. It'll also add sidewalks and then stormwater and lighting improvements to that area. Sinclair Road improvements. This is the big one that I talked about earlier. And so it'll be basically widening the road, again, adding sidewalks, stormwater improvements, and then an asphalt overlay to that portion of the road. And then State Farm Parkway, major maintenance. And I think this picture pretty much sums up why it's happening. So we have to replace that failed subgrade and concrete panels, and then we'll repair the sidewalks as well and the asphalt overlay after that all is done. Again, the picture kind of speaks for itself with the Faith Street major maintenance, replace the failed subgrade and the concrete panels there. We'll repair sidewalks, fill in sidewalk gaps, and then asphalt overlay once that is done. So here are the proposed fire department projects. And really for fire, it is the purchase of apparatus. They do have Fire Station 10 in here just to upgrade. That's the new fire station on the east side of town. But for the most part is replacing the apparatus because fire trucks are so expensive and they last a decent amount of time, but we have so many fire houses that it makes it hard to purchase these when we should. So we get a good list together and make them part of the CIP or the capital improvement sales tax. So some of that estimated funding is about 15 million for fire, and that is again construction of the fire stations and the replacement of the apparatus. And then lastly, the police department projects. We're estimating about 16 million for those. And so we'll have construction and renovation of police stations. We have the phase 2 of the Molly Bowden policing center, and then phase 1 of the downtown facility, which is in bad repair right now, and then we definitely need some upgrades to that facility. So that is basically the presentation on the capital improvement sales tax, and I'll be happy to take any questions.
2 minutes. Valerie, you've got a question.
Yeah, the Sinclair Road went by. I think this is a great project and very much needed. Was that in the CIP last year as well?
No.
Okay, maybe it was a different portion of the road or a different project along the road.
Yes, that's probably so.
Sue or Herb?
It's just me. I was just going to say thank you. I am assuming that many of the people on this call support this. I think we need to keep the quality of our town up. Luckily, it's not a real big tax as far as how much it hurts individuals on purchasing. And thank you for serving in your position. Appreciate your public service.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Would I be permitted to add just one word? Thank you for sticking with it. I know firsthand what hell there is in the job that you have got. I used to have 1% of the Department of Defense budget, and I fled.
Well, thank you, Valerie, and thank you, Matthew, for enlightening us. And in a way, Valerie, we had a chance to have an input into the next round of the capital improvements. So I think we'll hopefully see some more sidewalk-oriented priorities at that time.
I sure will try.
Well, feel free to reach out to me at any time. I'm always available to do things like this, talk to people, especially as we start to go through this budget session. There's a lot of misconceptions about what the city does versus what they don't do. And if anytime I could clear anything up like that, I'd be happy to do it.
Thank
Can I
you.
ask a quick question? Or
Yes.
maybe make a quick request? Matthew, thanks again for your work. The reports that you've been giving us are very useful, and I think the quality of reports has increased dramatically since you've been working on that. With the new software, though, we have problems comparing the current CIP to previous CIPs. We have a hard time telling what things moved up and down the list and why. If you have the ability to decode that for residents and review boards, I know that it would be very much appreciated.
Yeah, that is something that is going to change. It's a process that I've been trying to change since I got here, and it's just kind of slow moving. CIP document should be at least a 5-year document that shows the projects that are happening in the current year, and then kind of forecasting those out for 5 years. And then also what has happened in the previous year and what you've completed. And so we've made steps in fixing that, but it's just going to take some time for us to get there. We did add some new budgeting software this year, and it's proved to be a little challenging trying to produce the budget out of it. But I think as we get along, we get more familiar with it, it'll be better. So, but yeah, that is definitely something that will come.
Well, thank you once again, and let's move on to our regular Muleskinners meeting.
All right. Thank you all. I appreciate you having me.